name what's in a name? Can knowing the meaning of our ancestor surnames, what the history of those surnames are, help us in doing our research? In this episode, I interview author Robert Bell, who wrote the book of Ulster Surnames. And I found out in reading the book myself, which I ordered after I did the interview, due to all the COVID restrictions and holdups in shipping, that yes, in fact, knowing the history of my ancestor surnames, these Ulster Irish, these Scots Irish that I've been researching, really is going to help me when I finally cross over to Ireland to do research. So Robert is incredibly knowledgeable. We're really lucky that he's updated the book for 2021, and you can now buy it through Amazon and get it shipped easily to your house with that fabulous couple day shipping. So without any more from me, here's Robert Bell. I hope you get something out of this episode, and check the show notes for links to buy his book and other books referenced in the episode. Robert Bell, I'm so excited to have you here on the podcast. You're an author. Could you tell us about your work with the Ulster Historical Foundation, and then we're going to get to your book that you have coming out?
My work with the Ulster Historical Foundation is really just the book. They have published or republished the book. It's the Book of Ulster Surnames, which I wrote in the mid-'80s, and it was a success for its publisher then, which was Blackstaff Press. And it was reprinted, 6, 8 times. But a few years ago, the sales had dipped and the publisher wasn't really interested in it anymore and wasn't doing anything with it. So they let it go out of print about 3 or 4 years ago. And the Ulster Historical Foundation, a lot of their work is around helping people find their family history in Ulster. And they asked me, because the copyright had reverted to me, they asked me would I be interested in them publishing it again. And of course I was interested. Very nice, because it's a useful handbook for anyone searching for ancestors in what is actually 9 county Ulster, not what's now Northern Ireland, which is 6 counties, but 9 county Ulster. So that's Northern Ireland plus Donegal, Monaghan, Cavan, and that's where your Scots Irish or Ulster Scots come from.
Oh yes, we have a lot of them here in Pennsylvania. And why would an American researcher want to get this book? What can we get out of this book that we couldn't get off the internet? And just so you know, I'm a huge fan of books, and I'm really excited when books that kind of went out of print and are hard to find are brought back, because they're so full of much more valuable information than what we can just get through internet searches.
Well, you can find quite a lot on the internet these days, and also with family history. In fact, if you go to with many of these Ulster names, if you go on Wikipedia, you'll find stuff about the family, referencing my book quite often. But the book deals with 500 main names and then references to thousands more. So you have variant spellings and what are the connections and so on between the names. With the book, the book is referring you back and forward. See also, you come to the end of the name is one of the names in the Book of the Surnames, but it may say, see also Cavan, and there'll be a different entry for the Scottish variant of the name or the Irish variant of the name. So it's a deeper experience than simply looking up your name on the internet.
That sounds wonderful, and I can't wait, because I have a whole bunch of Ulster surnames to look up. But is there some surnames that as a researcher and who studied this, that you see a certain surname and you just know that's an Ulster surname, that it doesn't overlap with anybody else? Or
yes, absolutely. They are They are Irish names of Ulster, the province of Ulster. There's a lot of very famous names that originate from what's an Ulster name. Maybe the most famous of them is Guinness, which comes from McGuinness. The McGuinnesses were the lords of County Down. Actually, at the launch of the Surnames book, we got it sponsored by Guinness. They gave us a keg with 80 pints of Guinness in it and came on how to pour it and so on. And the publisher also put on drinks, so it was quite a party that night. But, Guinness, Cassidy, Maguire, I've got a whole list here. The O'Donnells, the Laverys, Rooney, Kane, Riley, O'Reilly. These are all Ulster names. Doherty, O'Hanlon, McBride, Donnelly. A lot of those names I see American television or on the American news. These are common names. And these are all Ulster names. They come from old Ulster. But then, of course, there are a lot of what we would call planter names, people the Protestant people brought to Ulster in the 17th century and the 18th century. And they're not purely, of course, names from Ulster, but the names that are very much associated with Ulster are very common in Ulster. Armstrong, Elliot, Bell, my own name is one of the 10 most common names in Ulster. So they're distinguishably Ulster names, but of course they're also English, or they're French, or they're Scottish, or they're Welsh. And this is what I try to tease out in the book, were to see what all of the complexities are. And a problem, in my experience, when people are looking for their family history, they've got a set idea in their head. They've got this name, and this is my heritage. And my grandfather told me that. And whenever they look into it, it runs into the sand. The research runs into the sand because it was more complex than that. And maybe their family history meant that their ancestors at some stage changed religion, or their ancestors had an Irish name which couldn't be pronounced by something that sounded the same, McQuinnigan, Cunningham. I'll put you down as Cunningham, and people whose ancestors were in fact Irish Catholics suddenly had an English after. So these things all need teased out, and that's what I did in the book.
Oh, excellent. And, I'm working on a book right now for research in just the city of Philadelphia. And I'm clearly doing something wrong because I don't have anyone getting me a keg of Guinness to celebrate. I need to switch up how I'm doing this. I just like, I love Irish culture. I really do. Because I feel like we work so hard sometimes, and we're always so focused on self-improvement here in America. I don't know, like we never stop and like just relax and celebrate. And it's always like, yeah, but it could be better. It's just like,
Yeah.
I don't know where that comes from, but it's really something. What resources? So you mentioned this the planters that came over from Scotland, and you mentioned we talked a little bit before the podcast about the changes in the English crown and how that influenced what happened in Ireland. So what other books or references would you recommend we use as genealogists to go along with your book? I know my knowledge of Irish history is pretty weak. I have like some major dates, but I don't know nearly enough. So what can I do, to help myself and for people listening? What can they use?
Yeah, well, there's a wonderful one-stop shop history book, A History of Ulster, by a wonderful man called Jonathan Bard. And sadly, we lost him to COVID last year. He's a remarkable man, and his History of Ulster is absolutely fantastic. I think there's an illustrated History of Ulster he also did, which is lovely. I mean, there are the standard reference books, kind of like my own. If you're looking specifically at the Scottish origins of the names, there's Black's Scottish surnames. There's Rainey's English classic. McClessic was the expert on Irish surnames. So these handbooks that are similar to mine, which I also drew on as part of the research. So those. But then there are all sorts of journals that are published locally in Ulster. That the journals of local historic societies and so on. You can find a lot of these online and so on. If you know that your family is from the old diocese of Clogher, for instance, there's a very good historical society with very good stuff there, and you can pursue things there. You can, of course, come to Ulster. If you did so in the Linnenhall Library in Belfast, which is where I was working at the time, whenever I wrote the book as a librarian, they have a genealogy collection there, which a lot of unpublished or out of print family histories from Ulster, so on. It's a fantastic resource. Yeah.
Oh man, I'm salivating thinking of that whole collection. The things we've missed due to COVID, and I'm so sorry for your loss of one of your icons in this research. It's really been something, this whole last year for all of us.
It's been terrible, especially for people like me, where I don't live at home. I live in Copenhagen. Unless I haven't seen my grandsons for a year and a few months. Normally, I'd be back home to Belfast maybe twice a year, and some of them would come here as well. And we're used to that. Not anymore. Not during COVID. It's been terrible for people who can't get to see their loved ones.
Kind of glad, though, you used your COVID time to update this book and to have the Ulster Historical Association put it out. There's an article you mentioned that's included in the book about the history of, well, I'll let you tell it. The article that's included, what the major changes in this update.
A particular group of people who came to the plantation at the time of the plantation. So that's 1603 to 1613, somewhere around there. That's when and they were members of what were called the riding clans, and they were from the Scots borders. That is, the borders between England and Scotland were for 300 years a special society had grown up there of basically gangsters, families who lived by stealing, rustling, coercion, blackmail, and so on. And because it was a border, it's a lawless area. So your family, you could take your men, drive deep into England and come away and steal all around you and come away with herds of cattle and so on. And by the time then the English forces were coming to catch you, you were across the border into Scotland. And the same was happening in English clans diving into Scotland and so on. And they were called the Reivers, which is an old name for rustler. And actually, this is where you get the English word bereaved from, because they had been to visit. You were bereaved. The Reivers had come. Isn't that terrible? In 1603, Queen Elizabeth died, and King James VI of Scotland became James I of England. And now you had one authority on both sides of the border, and he called those his middle shires, and he wasn't going to have it anymore. So those border areas were pacified ruthlessly, I mean, really ruthlessly. And a lot of those families came to Ulster. And a lot of those names, the famous Ulster Scot names, And these people were unlike the other Scottish lowland farmers that were coming. These people were fighting men from hundreds of years. They were the hard men of the Ulster plantation, and they were the hard men of whenever there was rebellions in 1640s and 1690 and so on. They were the hard men that held the siege of Londonderry. All their names are the ones that are prominent there. A lot of them are the ones who came to Pennsylvania, and they were fighting men, and they went to the border. They went again to the border, hard up against Indian country or Native American country. So generations, really many generations of tough fighting men, and that was in their blood and in their culture. The ability to build fortified farmhouses and so on, all the architectural skills to do that, incredible people. So in the book, I have there's an article that I wrote about telling this story in more detail, which was published in History Ireland, and they gave us the right to put it into the book. And also then under each of those names, 40 or 50 famous names of those riding clans. It gives you a lot of detail there. So that's Armstrong, Elliot, Crozier, Johnston, Bell. Bell was a big one. My ancestors, my own personal ancestors, almost certainly were part of these gangsters. In fact, my father told me when I was a boy that our ancestors were sheep stealers from the north of England. That always stuck with me, partly because he seemed quite proud of it. Well, he was almost right. It's actually Scotland, the Bells. But yeah. So a lot of these names, Nixon, you've had a president there.
Yep.
They were some of the worst. I was saying to you earlier that in the 16th century, the head of the Armstrongs could put 3,000 men in the saddle, fully armed, in 24 hours' notice. Incredible fighting men, with all of the skills of weapon making. And this was injected into the Ulster plantation, these people, and all that stuff was injected into it. And it's a big part of the ultimate success of the plantation.
I think if I had this version of history in my schooling about who was here in Pennsylvania, it would have been much more interesting than what we got. And you're showing me, and this is one of the reasons I love genealogy, is that our shared past is so much more complicated than what we've been told. I mean, there's so much behind it, and motivations of people, is complicated. It's not, you can't just make it one thing for everybody. And I can't wait to get my hands on this book. I waiting for that American edition. And you thankfully sent me a link so I can put it in the show notes for people to buy it over here. Because if you try to buy a book in Europe and have it shipped over, it costs more to have it shipped than the book.
I looked it up, and it is on Amazon.com.
Oh.
So it's available there now. So that's, yeah, you definitely don't want to be starting to try to get things from Europe.
So was there anything else about the book that you wanted to share with the audience that I didn't ask you?
Yeah, people use it. I mean, each entry is on average about 300 words long. Some of them are complicated, so they get 600 words or 800 words, but on average it's about 300 words long. And people thought, oh, well, I just look up my name, look up Alan, and you get 300 words on Alan. But what people found was, then they thought, well, my mother's surname was Gordon, was what on my grandmother, she was a Carson. So you go down these byways through the book, and there's a lot of information about a lot of people. How do you know? that was part of the success of the book. It did well. As I say, I went through, I think, 8 reprintings in its day, and now it's got a whole new lease of life. So it's great. I'm very happy to see it still out there and people learning from it. I'm very happy with that.
Excellent. That was great advice. I think it's always good to hear that we need to think a little more broadly and not just narrowly when we do our research. Robert, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I wish you good health, and I hope things open up for you safely and soon, that you can return to normal life. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure.
Wasn't it wonderful talking with Robert? He was in Copenhagen. I'm over here in Pennsylvania. And through the miracle of technology, here we are talking about the Ulster Irish. Who would have thought it? It's just so great. So I hope that you have a chance to read the book, buy the book. There's also the book of Ulster place names, which is also helpful when you're trying to track down those local records over in Ireland for your ancestors. The place names, very tricky. Check out the 2-part episode I did last year with the Ulster Historical Foundation. Part of the episode does cover how people get the place names a little confused. A heads up to everyone who's a regular subscriber. For the month of July, I will be attending genealogical institutes, like maybe some of you too. So for the podcast, you're going to get greatest hits or best of, I'm not sure what to call it yet, for the Friday releases. So you'll get some of my favorite parts of the episodes that I did, particularly in the earliest first season of the podcast. Be sure to subscribe to get those, and it'll give you a chance if you're driving, going on vacation, or also attending institutes to catch up on the podcast, or at least know that you're not missing anything. I'll be back with all new episodes in August, but our last episode for season 5 before the break, it's not the last season 5 episode. We still have a lot to do here. Next week's episode will be on summarizing what we've done with the John Curry research so far and making a research plan for now finding the grandparents of John Curry or William Curry's parents, depending on your perspective. So if that sounds confusing to you, I hope to clear it up and give you some great tips that you can use to discover your Pennsylvania ancestors.